Welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. Each week, we hear real-time stories from athletes and CEOs on how to maximize performance through an endurance mindset. Let's get started. Today's guest is a former corporate executive for 3 different Fortune 10 companies. He's turned himself into a best-selling author, speaker, and leadership expert. Please welcome Kyle McDowell. Welcome, Kyle.
Hey, Greg, you left out one very, very important thing.
What's that?
Fellow Mick.
Yes, that's McD even.
Yeah, fellow Mick. Hey, man,
McDOS.
thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join you today. I've been looking forward to this one, so thank you.
It's my pleasure. And as you know, we love talking about endurance and the endurance mindset. So Kyle, tell me how your endurance mindset has impacted your life unexpectedly.
I'm kind of embarrassed to say that I don't think I even realized that I had an endurance mindset until the last probably handful of years. And I think that's an important thing to kind of call out because surely I was living an endurance kind of themed lifestyle. I was always into athletics. I always knew if I wanted X, I had to work on Y. You know, my parents taught me the value of a dollar early on, so I knew that I had to work for things. But it wasn't until, gosh, man, probably my late 30s that I realized the importance of endurance, the importance of struggle, whether it be physical, emotional, mental, whatever. And certainly when you're in the middle of the suck that the endurance is meant to overcome, we lose sight of that. But anyway, I'll answer the question by simply just saying, after that realization, I am more than ever focused on welcoming challenges and strife into my life because I have learned that on the other side of that is a better Kyle, because of the experience. So
Certainly. Can we dive into an example of that, of something that maybe you wouldn't have leaned into 10 years ago that nowadays you're like, yeah, this hurts, so I'm going to do it?
It's an easy answer for me. It is what I'm calling the second chapter of my career, and that is spreading this message of we and the value of principle-based leadership. And I say that so sincerely, man, because if I'm being completely transparent with you, if someone had asked me to read my book 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't have read it because I had all the answers. I didn't need somebody to tell me how to lead. I knew it all, or so I thought. And I guess some of that comes with some of that wisdom, or at least getting a little less dumb, comes with age. But I never would have embraced the challenges that come with spreading this message. I never would have embraced the challenge that came with writing the book. As a matter of fact, I decided to write my book and didn't tell anybody for several months because I was scared I would go back on it. I was scared I would start telling people, and then I'd be I would be a fake or a fraud or even a hypocrite. And then, so for me, it's overcoming the challenges that come with the work that I do every single day. And a lot of that is trying to get folks to see things through a different lens. You can enjoy, or at least you don't have to hate your work life. I mean, after all, Greg, as you know, other than sleep, work is the one thing we will do more hours than anything else on this planet. So I just feel like it is worth the investment to make it less of a dread and more of something that we can get a lot of value out of.
Very well said. And I'd love to rewind a little bit from when did you come up with the concepts that led into your book, right? You talk about begin with we, and there's 10 principles. At some point in your corporate career, when did that come? When did it start with the first one and then turn into 5, that turned into 7, and then walk us through that process. Like, where were you? What were you doing?
Yeah. I remember it like it was yesterday. And my only regret about these 10 we's, and for your audience, so the book is called Begin with We, 10 Principles for Building and Sustaining a Culture of Excellence. And these principles are called the 10 we's. And I found them on probably year 23 or 24 of my career. I had just taken a role where I was leading 15,000 really, really committed men and women to our cause. And And we were the world's largest enrollment engine for health insurance. If you called 1-800-Medicare, you would probably get one of my team members. But prior to taking that job, I'd become really disenfranchised with corporate America, apathetic, the whole thing, man. I just was so over the bureaucracy, the toxicity, all the dysfunction, people behaving in ways that you just knew wasn't authentic, and they weren't being true to themselves. I got out. I left corporate America, and a week or two later, I had a call from a headhunter saying, "Hey, would you be interested in this job leading this enrollment operations with these 15,000 people?" And I said, "Yeah, but I need to have some autonomy, and I want to drive the way I want to drive. I want to lead the way I'd never been led, because at this point, I really felt like I had nothing to lose, Greg. It's like roll the dice. And if it works, it could be really transformational for me and some other folks. And if not, I'd be out of the gig." So fast forward, I got the role. The night before I was going to meet with the top 40 or 50 leaders of that org, I was in my hotel room in Lawrence, Kansas. I was still wearing the suit that I had on that day. Knowing that I was going to take the stage the next morning, I said, well, shit, I better come up with some slides. I don't know what I'm going to say. I was terrified. I knew that this was maybe my only, but definitely my earliest and biggest chance to tell them who I was. But as I started to think through this approach, I thought, well, they're going to care a lot less about who I am and more about what I can enable in them. The gentleman before me had been dismissed from his role. I think the woman before him might have been let go as well. So they had seen people come and go. They had seen people come and be the next thing to save them or to help them. So I just, there was no muse on my shoulder, and there was, I wish it was a more sexy story, because it certainly wasn't even a very nice hotel. I just started typing into PowerPoint, and about 2 hours later, I had 10 sentences. They each began and still do begin with the word "we." And I stepped out the next morning, and I walked the team through it. And the premise and the preface that I shared with the team, and I think it's really important, is these are the principles by which I will hold you accountable. And I was very direct in that. And I said, but I'm so comfortable being very direct in this because I expect you to do the same thing. I really and genuinely expect you to hold me as accountable as I'm going to hold you, because this is a team. There's no leadership gap. Half the team was really stoked, I could tell. A quarter of the team was skeptical, and there was another quarter that was just downright, this guy's full of it. But it fast forward, the results that team began to deliver, we went on an unprecedented run of just about any metric, every measurable of improvement. Employee engagement scores increased, attrition improved, and the biggest highlight of the whole story, Greg, I left that organization 5 years ago, and they still have the 10 We Awards. They still, their annual appraisals are all revolve around the 10 We's. But the shining, I think, light is I still have one-on-ones with a handful of my direct reports from that same company every 4 to 6 weeks. In my mind, there's no greater commentary than that.
That is a testament for sure. Kyle, when I was audio booking through your book, I was on a long drive, and I continue to think about my family, and like, shouldn't I print these off and put them up as a poster in my house? Because I believe in what you are saying through your writing. Talk to us about how it also can be used in a family setting.
Greg, I am moved when you say that. I'm genuinely moved, because it's not the first time I've heard it, and it is a beautiful unintended byproduct of this mission that I'm on. Because the principles, so I didn't anticipate this happening. But what happened, and I'm going to get back to your question in just a second, because I think it's going to prove the point. I found myself being this incredibly authentic, vulnerable leader inside the workplace, that I had teammates that would, without question, run through a wall for me, because they knew I would do the same for them. But then I found myself being less than that guy outside of work, in my relationships with my friends, my wife. I started to feel like a hypocrite. And it all came to me in one very silly story. I was at the grocery store, had just loaded all my groceries into my truck, And I, like so many of us, I took my grocery cart and I just slid it over to the next available parking spot. I did not return the grocery store. And I thought I had this moment, I remember it like it was yesterday. I had this moment, I go, if the first principle is we do the right thing always, well, you are not always doing the right thing. You, sir, are now a hypocrite. And if any one of my teammates or anyone that I worked with saw me doing that, I feel like my message is now diluted and I'm a fraud. So it started to play into my personal life. And as it started to play into my personal life, I started to hear stories from colleagues. My favorite is a fella who admitted and shared with us that he and his toddler, probably much older son now, would eat their morning cereal out of 10 Wee's coffee mugs that they had made. This one morning, his son drops the coffee mug. It shatters everywhere. Milk is everywhere. And his son turns to him and says, "That's okay, Daddy. We own our mistakes, right?" I mean, dude, how incredibly moving is that? So the premise of your question is really humbling to me. And the truth is, the reason why it is ironic that those two lines intersect, the personal and professional, as it relates to these principles, is it's a shame because if that's happening, we are not our authentic selves in one of those two environments. Why would principles and foundations for a system of beliefs and your code of behavior, why would it be any different in the workplace than outside of the workplace with friends and family and loved ones? Which is a real epiphany for me. And that's, I'm so happy that you observed that as well. Dude, I gave a talk at a major automotive manufacturer, German automotive manufacturer, several months ago. At the end of the keynote, this former Division I football player, shaved head, giant guy, leans forward in his seat and says, "If you guys were to read this book and take these principles to heart, like you, it will change how you raise your family." Excuse me. And I'd never had anybody say that in person the way that he did. There was silence across the room. I started to tear up. I literally teared up, man. And I sat back. There was a stool behind the podium. And I said, "Guys, that's it for Q&A. We're done." Because I had nothing better to add to that. And I love that you bring that up. So thank you for allowing me to share that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are right. And it even goes back to our endurance mindset. Like we can't just have an endurance mindset while training for a race or going into work. It needs to become part of our lifestyle. Kyle, I'd love to rewind back to that hotel room when you broke out the PowerPoint presentation. You said something prior to that about rolling the dice. This is going to be transformational for someone. That's a lot of confidence bringing into a work opportunity that many of us don't bring to work. So I think my point being that confidence allowed you to be more vulnerable, which then allowed you to produce these principles. So I'd love to talk through sort of that vulnerability and what part of our career
Yeah.
journey or even athletic journey should we turn that corner and have more self-belief and be able
Yeah.
to stand up in front of a group and say, "This is what I believe in. And if you want
Yeah.
to follow me, here we go."
Yeah. And if you don't want to follow me, that's okay too. But there's probably not a space on the team for you. And I'm comfortable in saying that because if you have read the principles and you say you can't get down with any one of them, then we do have a disconnect philosophically, and I don't think we can work together. Greg, you so astutely point out a leader's superpower it's a tie for me. It's empathy and vulnerability. I'm not sure which is greater or more important than the other. And it's so connected to the conversation, the topic we just discussed about the personal and professional intersection. Nobody wants to follow someone they don't trust. And nobody wants to follow someone who is purporting to be something that they're not. When the boss behaves in a way that is inauthentic, they don't show, for example, they cannot be relatable in a sense that, yeah, I've got issues going on outside of the workplace. Maybe I have a sick child as well. Maybe I'm going through some personal issues, or maybe I've got some mental health challenges. The boss is never one to admit that for fear of looking less authoritative or less important or less powerful. And when we shy away from that, the natural reaction to the person on the other end of the relationship, the team member, the person that reports to you, is distance, because I can't relate to you. I can't relate if you are not struggling with something. If we have an industry headwind that we're facing, or maybe there's a competitive threat that's right around the corner, and for the boss not to acknowledge that that's real, it just drives a wedge because they can't trust that person because they're not being authentically themselves. I frame it to this, man. I say it very simply: relatability plus authenticity equals trust. If the team member knows I am being me, warts and all, and that means I'm not going to be in a great mood every day, and that means I'm going to have, my concerns just like you, and we're going to be human on all levels. If they can see that is authentically who I am, and I can relate to them on some of these, because we have more in common than that which divides us. Once we find something on which we can be relatable and relate to one another, trust so naturally ensues. Which is a hard thing to find in the workplace, because we come to work almost with some armor that doesn't allow us to show that vulnerability. I appreciate you premising the question that I had some vulnerability that evening. I didn't look at it that way. But when I did notice myself becoming more and more comfortable with vulnerability, it was when team members, either purposely or not, would challenge me on the principles. So one of the principles is we embrace challenge. And I had a direct report who I am super tight with many, many years later, but the beginning of our relationship was very rocky. She challenged me at every corner. She didn't believe in me. She thought the principles were garbage. She thought I was a fraud. So at every opportunity, she would challenge me. And the Kyle before these principles would have banged my fist on the desk, probably cursed at her, alienated her, and got what I wanted. But I realized if I didn't practice one of my own principles, we embrace challenge, the whole team would see that. And the whole team would think I was a fraud and the 10 movies are now a house of cards. So it was important for me to be vulnerable, allow her to be this jerk for a while, and prove to her that I was the person I said I was, all in an effort to get her trust. She is one of the people, by the way, that I still have regular one-on-ones with 5 years later.
That's
True
awesome.
story.
Yeah, my question was more around, and I probably didn't frame it quite right, but it was more around the confidence that you had that allowed you to develop the principles and then go into a room of 40, 50 leaders and say, guys, girls, this is what I believe in.
Yeah.
Knowing that if they laughed at you out the door, your stint there would have been pretty short. So I guess another question is like, what was your backup plan? Like you knew you were going to stand on that stage that morning. You hoped this thing worked. Was there a backup plan or
No, none. No. Greg, I knew I wanted to be compelling. I wanted to give them something to think about, but I also, and I don't know, I can't, again, there's no muse, but I want to think that, I do recall actually thinking this the night before. My direct reports, the 6 or 7 folks that reported to me, they all had an average tenure in their role of more than 10 years. And I can't exactly explain why this crossed my mind, but my thought was, and it still is today, and I think it's where some value was found, is these guys have seen it all. They have forgotten more about this job than I know. Mm-hmm. So for me to come in as if I am some anointed czar who knows it all, I think is really, really is big ego that I don't think I have. I think I had at one point, but not necessarily now. So I just there was no backup plan, and I knew that it was going to challenge me every single day. But I kind of felt like it was worth the challenge, and that's the shame, but also the beauty in this journey that I'm on is I didn't lead that way the first 20 plus years, and once I found principle-based leadership and created the 10 weeks, the connections that I've made with people have reignited a passion that I lost the first couple of decades. I've found so much more fulfillment than I ever found in the first couple of decades, and truly feel like, man, I'm making a difference. And that's where, it helps me sleep at night.
So digging into the book a little bit deeper, is there a story that there was just too much detail that you couldn't put in the book, that was like your ultimate favorite, but if you read between the lines, you could figure out who it is, that you could talk about on our podcast versus actually have printed in black and white? And if so, what is that story?
Absolutely. Yes. And those close to me in that those that lived through many of the stories in there. I remember when I sent them all advanced copies, and I would get questions like, that didn't happen that way. That did because, and I probably shouldn't share more details than this, but there are many stories in the book where the boss, or the person that I am portraying as my boss, was actually my client, and vice versa. I had one particularly very difficult client towards the latter part of my career that I just, no matter how hard I tried, really could not connect with her. And she was a very influential person in her company. So I had to make the best out of it. There are some stories about her in there, but she is not my client in the book. She is my boss. So I kind of flip some stories around to protect the not so innocent. I will share one story though that is not super juicy, but it is a little deeper than what's mentioned in the book. And it's connected to the last question and answer that we just walked down. So, Greg, you remember I mentioned out of that 40 or 50 folks that I met with that morning, a quarter of them were, this guy's full of it. Like, I don't buy it. Well, one of those gentlemen that evening admitted to me, we were at a dinner or a function later, he admitted to me that while I was speaking, he Googled the 10 We's because he felt like they were too slick, too well thought out, and then I had stolen them from somewhere. Well, he found nothing, of course, which did lead to a copyright. I made sure to copyright it. And then he later admitted, so he shared with that story. He shared that story with me, that he Googled it. And he said, by the way, can I get the PowerPoint presentation? Because I want to make sure I share it with my team. I want to cascade this wonderful message. And it was several days, if not weeks later, that Nick mentioned the only reason he wanted the PowerPoint was so he could check the properties to see if I was the actual creator of the document or I'd stolen it from somebody. I fired him the next day. No, I didn't. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, that was one of my favorite stories. Nick, by the way, is also, you probably remember this, the $10 million mistake story that's I cover in the book. Nick was the same gentleman who made a $10 million mistake and called me in borderline tears one evening because he thought I was going to get fired. And I actually asked Nick to summarize that scenario, that story, and I included his accounting of that word for word in the book because I'm very proud of the way we handled it together. And the message that he walked away with was, it's okay to make a mistake. I just can never make this mistake again, and I got to try like hell to put all kinds of QA checks in place. So there's a couple good ones, but I can't incriminate anyone else, I think.
Fair enough. How about any unexpected outcomes, benefits from using these principles? Something that you're putting it into practice with your team and you're expecting X to happen and Y occurs and it's that much better, that much richer, and it's because of the principles that you were living up to.
Yeah. The first is something we've already touched on, so I won't go super deep into that. And that's the bleed into the personal side of our lives, has been, when someone tells you it's changing how they're raising their children, younger children, that's probably the best and the brightest example I can think of. Probably next to that is the way we talk to each other changes. Here are a couple quick examples. So when you're on the team, you have, by definition, you're still on this team. You have subscribed to these principles. In other words, there's not a scenario that's going to present itself that would cause you to or allow you to deviate from these principles, right? So when we have bad news to share, or frankly, if we think someone on the team is slinging a bunch of syllables that aren't fact-based, or they are kind of talking out of their backside. In the old world, team members would wait for the boss to call out that person. And here's a very real life example. My staff meetings turned into conversations instead of readouts. So historically, I'd be at the end of the table, team members around. One person gives an update while I'm asking questions back and forth, and invariably, what's happening. The rest, everyone else in the room is either on their phone, on their laptop, kind of slightly paying attention, but not really. One of the coolest things that came from this change is when so-and-so, when Lori would give an update for her area, other members of the team are now paying more attention because they know they are not allowed to, but they are obligated to challenge if they hear something that doesn't pass their sniff test. And for your audience, I say this in the book, but for context, challenges must be grounded in either data or experience. They can't be opinion based. They have to be grounded in one of those two, if not both. But what would happen, Lori would give an update, and Julia, who's sitting right next to her, would hear Lori, but have some contrary data, or she was in another meeting and something else was. Lori would say, Julia would say, well, that's not exactly how I heard that. And someone on the other side of the table, Drex, would lean in and say, well, listen, we challenge each other, right? And the principles would start to become part of our nomenclature. And when that's the case, when you hear, hey, Greg, we challenge each other, right? You are now obligated to listen. It's coming from a place of experience or data. And if it's not, by the way, you're not obliged to listen. You don't have to. And it is an opportunity for improvement that this person has identified. You should listen. And that created innovation. That created a hunger to do better. It created this culture of excellence where we really aspired to deliver excellence in everything that we do because we held each other accountable. I wasn't the only one, playing boss and pointing out people's deficiencies. We all were doing so, but not in an effort to play gotcha. It was in an effort to make people better than they were, to make us better. So that was, for me, how they became part of our nomenclature and really part of our DNA, the fabric of who we were and still are.
That's helpful. Thank you. Rewinding quite a bit now, talk to us about who you are, your childhood, schooling, got into leadership. Give us your journey.
Yeah, I came from middle class folks, middle class at best, actually. Taught me the value of a dollar, really, really impressed the importance of work ethic on me. Both were very driven career folks, both 100% commission-based folks who, to this day, I still have a ton of respect for that. I lost my mother and my father probably 11, 12 years ago, respectively. But I knew early on that I wanted something more than what my parents had afforded me. I knew I was capable of more, and sports was an outlet for me in many ways. I played football from the age of 6 or 7 all the way through high school. I knew I was always able to connect inputs and outputs. In other words, I knew if I wanted the shiniest new pair of Air Jordans in high school when they came out, my folks said, get your butt to work. So I would mow lawns. I would for weeks on end, knowing that there was a reward at the end of this. So I always connected that, input and output and activity for dollars, that type of stuff. And then, so I applied for a job, my first job in corporate America. I applied when I was 17 years old. And of course, you can't work in that world until you're 18. But I rolled the dice thinking if I get an interview and should I be lucky enough to get an offer, it would happen after my 18th birthday. So I got lucky. I applied in June. I interviewed in July. My birthday's in July. I got the offer in August, and that was a little over 30 years ago. And then I just paid my way through my undergrad and managed to kind of just very methodically work my way up the corporate ladder, and ultimately found myself in business school, and have just had a really, by most people's accounts, very, very successful run in the professional world. And now I'm trying to parlay that into the personal side and help people be better, man. But I think those humble beginnings are what probably put me where I am, especially as it relates to an endurance mindset. Overcoming things to get things or to be better at something was really impressed upon me early.
That was super helpful. So let's talk about what you're doing now. You've got the book, you're doing some speaking engagements and some coaching. Give us a little bit more flavor behind how you're spreading this impact.
Yeah, well, so you nailed it. So the book just passed 10,000 copies,
Congrats.
which is like, thank you, man. It's just mind blowing to me. I remember telling my wife when I finished the manuscript that if I were to sell 1,000 copies, I'd be over the moon. So I've far surpassed that. Became a Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestseller. I am on stage at least once a month. I've got a busy year shaping up already for 24. And in between speaking, I do a bunch of executive coaching. I've got a handful of clients, almost two handfuls of clients now, that I spend usually an hour a week or so working on various growth and development challenges that they're encountering, trying to help them find, fulfillment and reconnect passion in their roles. I've just started to kick around the idea of book number 2. So that's kind of a, I won't admit it when it's here, because it'll be the same situation until I'm really committed. I don't want to share it and then I blow it by not delivering it. But that's it. It's all I do is eat, sleep, and work. And that's trying to spread this message, my friend.
Well, one of the principles of goal setting is to share your goals so that you have to do them. Just giving you a little nudge there. Kyle, we've got many entrepreneurs who follow this podcast. What leadership advice would you give them?
So I think the leader has really 2 primary objectives. And the first is you got to work like hell to get all the noise out of the way. So that could be, does the employee have their optimal work at home or hybrid situation? I know that could be controversial. So does the employee have all the training they need? Do they have all of the tools at their disposal to be their very, very best to deliver excellence? And I think that's the leader's number 1 objective. The second is to inspire and motivate and help that employee reach new heights and achieve that excellence in spite of the things that we can't do away with, right? It's called work. It's not called fun. So there are going to be things the leader cannot just take care of. Examples could be like a silly report that you don't even read that they send you on a weekly or monthly basis. Or it could be just some very simple training that you just need to pony up a few $100 for. So get those things out of the way, enable them to be their very best. So for your audience, I think if we focus on those 2 things, what can I do to make my employees, my team members' jobs as efficient, as effective? I like to say easy, but that's a relative term because it's called work. But in other words, as predictable and as joyful as possible. And if we focus on that and less on what I am or what I mean or my importance or what I can do for them rather than just doing it, I think we'd all be better off. And I think the corporate life and corporate America would be a less cringy place. So focus more outward. And because this ironic thing happens, Greg, and I know you know this, but when I invest my energy and my time and my care into someone else, the odds of them performing better or raising their game, it increases. Just math will tell you it increases. If I do that for all of my team, the likelihood that my team's success will also, the bar will raise. And then by definition, if my team is performing well, I as the leader am performing well. But if I go in focusing on me and how I'm going to make myself look better, the math would say I am putting someone else at a disadvantage, and that's usually the team. So if we it's so obvious when you break it down slowly, but I think so missed in most environments, because when you do genuinely and authentically invest in your team's growth and development, they benefit, the team benefits, and you benefit. But we got to get out of our own, this is me, my own accolades, my growth, my development mindset.
That's well said. Shifting gears slightly, any personal habits or favorite life hacks that you currently use?
Man, this is going to sound so cliche, but it's timely that you asked that because for me, I'll cut to the chase. Getting to bed at a decent hour is the first chapter of the book that allows me to flip to chapter 2 the next morning, getting up early to work out, to be active, to just some quality me time. But none of that happens without getting to bed early. And the reason I said it's a timely answer, it's kind of cliche, right? You see all these gurus saying, I sleep, I'm up at 4:30 and all these things. I don't wear that as a badge of honor, but my point is, or where I'm going is, I found myself feeling really lethargic last week. Maybe it was early last week. And I started to think through my sleep patterns and sleep habits. And I realized I was going to bed later than I usually like, but I didn't realize it at the time. So I was grouchy, was not as productive as I usually am. My wife said I was irritable, and I traced it all back to sleep. So I've gotten back a little more disciplined the last week since I realized this. And dude, I have more energy. I have more zeal and zest for the day. And I know it's a cliche answer to talk about getting sleep, but dude, for me, sleep is just as important as diet and exercise. And I know it, not just like from a drowsiness or sleepy perspective. I know it from my moods if my sleep is off. So I wouldn't call it a hack, but that staying disciplined on my sleep has just been huge for me.
I am 100%.
How about you?
Yeah, it's same. Sleep and exercise, right? I find that that my mood changes, my emotion changes during and after exercise. If I'm in a grumpy mood or struggling with a challenge and I sit on my bike for 30 minutes, all of a sudden that challenge is a little less
Yeah.
important.
And why do so many people resist it then?
Well, it's hard, right? That first step, I should be getting ready to jump on my bike in 20 minutes and I'm thinking of excuses of why I'm not going to do it. That first step is always the hardest. And you learn through this endurance mindset that getting that first step, one step
Yeah.
after the other, you'll get there.
When did you find this mindset? Like, what was your first quote unquote endurance feat? At what age?
It was probably 15 years ago. So it was 35. I was taking a company through a Chapter 11 bankruptcy process while training for an Ironman. And it was, wait a second, these are the same principles: getting to bed early, setting goals, doing what you're told, doing what you said you're going to do, very much so in line with the principles of your book.
That was your first Ironman?
First Ironman was 10 years ago. So that was 15. I was doing a half,
Okay.
starting to train for a half. But I was taking my company through a Chapter 11 bankruptcy process. And it's like these principles just align up. And yeah, memory lane for sure.
Did you debate not doing the event because the bankruptcy stuff was just pulling at you so hard?
No,
in terms of your time?
It was the opposite. It was
Really?
my time got more efficient. I was able to collapse time. I chose what's important. Um, my extracurricular activities that didn't sort of line up with those two activities would go away.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the intensity I find, and it's one of the reasons I still do this now, is that when I'm in heavy training season, the extra time in my life is so short that I got to be more intentional with my family. I got to be more intentional with my business. I got to be more intentional with my podcast and not just sit there and, fill it
Doom scroll.
hot air.
Yeah. I told you this the first time we chatted. You folks that have that mindset, but not just have the mindset, but actually live it, especially in terms of events and triathlons and those things, is so impressive to me. And I think there's no better example than you have found the fact that really hard work, when angled towards an outcome, the outcome so dwarfs any pain and discomfort that the work required. Right?
100%.
I just don't understand why more people don't actually engage in hard things. And hard's relative, right? So look, man, I'm delaying back surgery right now. My cardio is on a treadmill at a 4. That's it. But I do it for an hour because I know I got it. So in other words, I know I have to, and it sucks. I hate it. It's so boring. It's so boring, but I know it's all I can do now. And I know you have to overcome hard things to find peace, I believe. I don't think that's confrontational, but yeah.
Kyle, how can an audience member get in touch with you?
Very simple. Website is KyleMcDowellInc.com. And essentially every social platform is at Kyle McDowell Inc. as well. And, I appreciate you asking that, Greg. And it's not just to chase followers. I really do love engaging with folks that might be having a work-related issue or a professional development-related issue. So I'm not even selling, man. Just message me. I would love to interact and help those in your audience. So thank you for giving me the chance to share it.
I appreciate it. And we'll put that in the links to your book and your other websites into our show notes. And going back to your question of why people don't go towards the hard things, Well, that's one of the purposes of this podcast, right? This
Yeah.
podcast was designed to tell the stories about triumph and misery and how we got through difficult things and use the endurance mindset to help us with that. So I asked my audience, right, if you like this show, please like it, please subscribe. Let's share Kyle's principles. They're very impactful. I was being very authentic when I talked about my family and thinking about these principles and how I can help guide my children in making better decisions. And so please like the show. Please spread this message. Kyle, you've been a fantastic guest. I could talk to you for hours, but
Likewise.
we've got a bigger impact to make.
Amen. Great to be on the show, and thank you for the time and the platform. Appreciate you, Greg.
Appreciate it, mate. Thank you for tuning in to the Chief Endurance Officer podcast. To hear more inspiring stories and strategies around the endurance mindset, be sure to subscribe below or visit us at chiefenduranceofficer.com. Until next time, keep pushing those limits